Alright, folks, tonight we're diving deep into the strange and often unsettling world of the SCP Foundation. Picture this: you're nestled in your bed, the lights are low, maybe a gentle breeze is rustling the curtains. Outside, the crickets are chirping their nightly lullaby, and perhaps the distant hum of traffic fades in and out like a ghostly sigh. It's the kind of quiet that makes you think about things you wouldn't normally consider when the sun's blazing and life is loud. Things like a bookshelf that writes its own adventures. Yeah, you probably won't find that at your local IKEA, and frankly, you're probably better off that way. So before you get too comfortable and drift off into dreamland, take a quick moment to hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoy these little journeys into the anomalous, but only if you genuinely dig what I'm putting down here. Also, drop a comment below and let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see where in the world these stories reach. Now let's extinguish those bright lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soothing white noise, and together we'll step into the peculiar case of SCP-826. You find yourself standing in a dimly lit archive. The air is thick with the scent of aged paper and dust, a smell that speaks of forgotten knowledge and secrets carefully guarded. Rows upon rows of shelves stretch into the gloom, each packed with books bound in various states of disrepair. Some are leather bound with gilded lettering, their spines cracked and faded. Others are more modern, their covers worn from frequent handling. The only light source comes from a few strategically placed lamps, casting long, dancing shadows that make the stacks seem to shift and breathe. You can hear the faint hum of the building's ventilation system, a low, constant drone that underscores the silence. You're here because of a rumor, a whisper that has circulated within certain circles, a tale of a bookshelf unlike any other. It's said to reside somewhere within this labyrinthine archive, a seemingly ordinary piece of furniture with an extraordinary ability. This bookshelf, designated SCP-826, is reported to spontaneously generate books. Not just any books, mind you, but narratives that become tangibly real within a certain proximity to the object. You carefully make your way down a narrow aisle, your footsteps muffled by the thick carpeting. The titles on the spines blur as you pass, a jumble of subjects and authors you've never heard of. You run your fingers along the rough texture of a cloth-bound volume, a strange sense of anticipation building within you. The idea of a bookshelf that can conjure entire realities is both fascinating and unsettling. It makes you wonder about the power of stories, the way they can grip our imaginations and transport us to other worlds. But what happens when those worlds bleed into our own? As you continue your search, you notice a small, handwritten label tucked into the shelf near eye level. It reads, "Restricted Access, Level 2, Clearance Required." Your curiosity piqued, you lean in closer. This could be it. This could be where SCP-826 is located. You glance around, half expecting someone to materialize from the shadows and demand your credentials. But the aisle remains deserted, the only sound the soft rustling of paper as you inadvertently brush against a book. You consider your options. You could turn back, adhere to the regulations, and perhaps never uncover the truth behind the whispering bookshelf. Or you could proceed with caution, your senses on high alert, and see what secrets lie beyond this restricted section. A thrill of anticipation, mixed with a healthy dose of apprehension, courses through you. You take a deep breath and step past the label, venturing further into the unknown. The air in this section feels different, heavier somehow. The shadows seem deeper, and the silence is more profound. You notice that the arrangement of the shelves is less uniform here, almost haphazard. Books are stacked at odd angles, some overflowing onto the floor. It's as if the very organization of this space has been disrupted by some unseen force. And then you see it. At the end of the aisle, bathed in a soft pool of light from a nearby lamp, stands a bookshelf. It looks ordinary, made of dark wood, slightly scuffed around the edges. It's filled with books of various sizes and colors. There's nothing immediately remarkable about its appearance. It could be any bookshelf you might find in a dusty old library or a forgotten corner of someone's attic. But as you approach, you notice something peculiar. Some of the books on this shelf seem new. Their spines are crisp, their covers vibrant, as if they were just printed. Yet there's no sign of anyone having recently placed them there. And the titles, they're unlike anything you've ever seen before. The Clockwork Heart of the Nebula, Whispers from the Obsidian Labyrinth, The 7 Keys to Unmaking Reality. These aren't titles you'd find in the Dewey Decimal System. This has to be it. This has to be SCP-826. One established fact about anomalous objects is their tendency to manifest in unassuming forms, often blending seamlessly with their surroundings until their unique properties are triggered. A seemingly ordinary teapot might brew liquids with bizarre effects, or a common photograph could depict impossible events. SCP-826 fits this pattern perfectly, its mundane appearance masking its extraordinary capabilities. A curious detail you observe is a small, worn leather bookmark sticking out from one of the newly generated books. It's intricately carved with symbols you don't recognize. It seems out of place, an antique marker nestled within a pristine volume. Academics have long debated the nature of reality and the power of narrative. Some argue that stories shape our understanding of the world, influencing our beliefs and behaviors in subtle yet profound ways. The existence of SCP-826 takes this debate to a literal extreme, suggesting that sufficiently potent narratives can, under certain conditions, alter the fabric of reality itself. You reach out a hand, hesitant to touch one of the strange books. What kind of world lies within these pages? What dangers or wonders might be unleashed if a story from this bookshelf were to become real in this archive? Your fingers brush against the cover of Whispers from the Obsidian Labyrinth. The material feels strangely cool and smooth, almost like polished stone. You hesitate for a moment longer, a sense of unease prickling at the back of your neck. It's as if the book itself is radiating a silent warning. Ignoring the instinct to step back, you gently pull the book from the shelf. It slides out smoothly, and you notice that the space it occupied now seems slightly distorted. It's a subtle effect, a barely perceptible warping of the air, but it's there nonetheless. The book in your hands is surprisingly heavy. Its pages are made of a dark, almost black paper, and the text is written in a script you don't recognize, intricate symbols that seem to writhe and shift as you look at them. Despite the alien nature of the writing, you feel a strange pull, an almost hypnotic suggestion that you should try to understand it. As you hold the book, the air around you begins to thicken. The faint hum of the ventilation system seems to fade, replaced by a low, resonant thrumming that vibrates in your chest. The shadows in the archive deepen, and you have the unsettling feeling that you are no longer alone. Suddenly, a gust of wind whips through the aisle, rustling the pages of the surrounding books. It's an unnatural breeze, as there are no open windows or vents nearby. The temperature in the room drops noticeably, and you can see your breath misting in the air. You clutch the book tighter, your heart pounding in your ears. Something is happening. The story within this book, whatever it may be, seems to be activating. You glance around frantically, trying to pinpoint the source of the disturbance. The bookshelves seem to loom over you, their silent occupants now feeling less like inert objects and more like watchful sentinels. The shadows dance and writhe, taking on vaguely humanoid shapes in the periphery of your vision. A faint whisper reaches your ears, a sibilant murmur that seems to come from all directions at once. You can't make out any distinct words, but the tone is undeniably malevolent, filled with a cold, ancient dread. This is far beyond just a bookshelf that writes stories. This is a conduit, a gateway to something else. One of the more perplexing aspects of SCP-826 is the apparent intelligence behind the generated narratives. The stories often exhibit internal consistency and complex world building, suggesting a level of authorship that defies simple random generation. Whether this intelligence resides within the bookshelf itself, draws upon some external source, or is a byproduct of its anomalous properties, remains unknown. A bizarre detail associated with SCP-826 is the occasional appearance of physical objects within the archive that seem to have originated from the generated stories. These have included strange artifacts, unusual flora, and even, on one documented occasion, a small insect-like creature that vanished without a trace. The prevailing academic theory regarding SCP-826 posits that it interacts with latent narrative fields within the surrounding environment, somehow drawing upon collective unconsciousness or perhaps even alternate realities to manifest its stories. However, the precise mechanism by which this occurs is still a subject of intense study and speculation. The whispering intensifies, and you feel a cold touch on your arm. You whirl around, but there's nothing there. The sense of being watched, however, is overwhelming. The stories on this bookshelf aren't just words on a page. There's something more, something alive. You realize that you need to put the book back. Now, with trembling hands, you reach towards the shelf, trying to return Whispers from the Obsidian Labyrinth to its place. But it resists, feeling as if it's been glued to your fingers. The whispering grows louder, closer, and you can now make out faint, chilling syllables. You shouldn't have. Panic surges through you. You tug harder on the book, and finally, with a tearing sound, it comes free. As it leaves your grasp, the whispering abruptly stops. The unnatural wind dies down, the temperature returns to normal, and the oppressive atmosphere begins to dissipate. You shove the book back onto the shelf, the distorted air around its place shimmering briefly before returning to normal. You take a step back, your breath coming in ragged gasps. That was close, too close. You have a feeling that you've only scratched the surface of the mysteries surrounding SCP 826, and that some stories are best left unread. You stand there for a moment, catching your breath, your senses still on high alert. The silence of the archive has returned, but it now feels different, imbued with a sense of latent threat. You can't shake the feeling that you've disturbed something significant, something that was better left undisturbed. Despite the unsettling encounter, a part of you, the part that sought out this anomalous bookshelf in the first place, is still intensely curious. You scan the other titles on SCP-826, your eyes lingering on the clockwork heart of the nebula. What kind of story could that be? A tale of cosmic mechanics and stellar empires. And what would happen if that story were to bleed into reality here in this quiet archive? You notice another book tucked away on a lower shelf. Its cover is plain and unmarked, its spine simply labeled Incident Log. Intrigued, you reach for it. This might contain some answers, some insight into the history and effects of SCP-826. The Incident Log is a thick volume filled with handwritten entries, the ink faded in places. As you flip through the pages, you see dates spanning several decades. The entries are terse and formal, detailing various instances where the narratives generated by SCP-826 have manifested in the real world. One entry describes the appearance of a dense fog within a 10-meter radius of the bookshelf following the generation of a story titled The Silent Mist. The fog persisted for several hours, exhibiting unusual properties that defied conventional meteorological explanations. Visibility within the fog was near zero, and personnel reported a disorienting effect, as if their sense of direction had been subtly altered. Another entry recounts the brief manifestation of several small, bioluminescent organisms after a book called Creatures of the Phosphorescent Abyss appeared on the shelf. These creatures, described as jellyfish-like and emitting a soft, ethereal glow, hovered in the air for a few minutes before dissipating without a trace. As you read further, the incidents become more concerning. One entry details a containment breach scare when a book titled Shadows That Stalk the Mind resulted in several personnel reporting vivid hallucinations and feelings of intense paranoia. The entry notes that the effects subsided only after the book was removed from SCP-826 and placed in a lead-lined containment locker. You also find references to experiments conducted on SCP-826. Researchers have attempted to influence the type of stories generated by placing specific books near it or by exposing it to various stimuli. The results, however, have been largely inconclusive, with the bookshelf seemingly operating on its own unpredictable logic. One particularly unsettling entry describes an attempt to introduce a blank notebook to SCP-826. The intention was to see if the bookshelf could write directly into it. The log states that the notebook remained blank for several days. Then one morning, researchers found it filled with a single word written in an unknown script: beware. This log paints a picture of an anomaly that is not only capable of generating reality-bending narratives, but may also possess a degree of awareness, or even sentience. The implications are chilling. What are the limits of SCP-826's power? What kind of catastrophic scenario could unfold if the wrong story were to become real? You close the incident log, your mind reeling from the information you've just absorbed. This isn't just a quirky anomaly, it's a potential threat, a wild card that could rewrite reality in unpredictable and potentially dangerous ways. One undeniable truth about the SCP Foundation is its constant struggle to understand and contain anomalies that defy conventional scientific understanding. SCP-826 is a prime example of this challenge, its very nature blurring the lines between fiction and reality. A strange detail mentioned in one of the log entries is the recurring motif of a black cat appearing in several of the generated stories, often as an omen or a guide. Its significance, if any, remains unknown. The philosophical implications of SCP-826 are vast. If a bookshelf can generate realities through narrative, what does that say about the nature of our own reality? Could it be that our world is also, in some way, a story being told? This is a question that continues to fuel academic debate within and outside the Foundation. You look back at the unassuming bookshelf, now seeing it in a completely different light. It's no longer just a piece of furniture. It's a Pandora's box of infinite possibilities, a silent storyteller with the power to reshape existence. You realize that your initial curiosity has morphed into a profound sense of unease. You need to leave this section of the archive to put some distance between yourself and this reality-bending object. As you turn to go, you notice one last detail on the shelf next to SCP-826. It's a small, framed photograph. The image is faded and slightly blurred, but you can make out two figures: a young child sitting on the floor, surrounded by books, and a tall, shadowy figure standing behind them, its features obscured. There's something deeply unsettling about the photograph, a sense of quiet dread that emanates from the faded image. You have no idea who these people are or what their connection to SCP-826 might be, but the picture leaves you with a lingering feeling of unease as you finally retreat from the restricted section, the secrets of the whispering bookshelf echoing in your thoughts. You find yourself back in the main section of the archive, the familiar scent of old paper and dust now strangely comforting. The dim lighting and endless rows of books no longer feel quite so ominous. You take a deep breath, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that lingered after your encounter with SCP-826. But the image of the framed photograph, the child surrounded by books, and the shadowy figure looming behind remains etched in your mind. Who were they? What was their connection to the anomalous bookshelf? And why did that image evoke such a strong sense of foreboding? You decide to try and find some information about SCP-826 in the Foundation's public database. You locate a terminal tucked away in a quiet corner and log in. The interface is sterile and efficient, a stark contrast to the dusty, organic feel of the archive itself. You type in SCP-826, and a file appears on the screen. It contains a detailed description of the object, its containment procedures, and a summary of known incidents. As you scroll through the document, you find confirmation of everything you observed: the spontaneous generation of books, the reality-bending effects of the narratives, the unpredictable nature of the generated stories. The file also mentions the incident log you found, confirming its authenticity. It notes that access to this log is restricted to personnel with Level 3 clearance or higher, making you wonder how it ended up on an accessible shelf. Was it an oversight? Or was there some other reason for its seemingly misplaced location? As you continue reading, you come across a section detailing the object's discovery. SCP-826 was found in an abandoned bookstore in Arkham, Massachusetts in 1975. Local authorities reported strange occurrences in the vicinity of the store, including unusual weather patterns, the fleeting appearance of bizarre creatures, and reports of people experiencing vivid and disturbing hallucinations. A Foundation containment team was dispatched to investigate, and they discovered the anomalous bookshelf in a back room surrounded by stacks of newly generated books with bizarre titles. The bookstore owner was nowhere to be found, and his fate remains unknown. The file includes several photographs of SCP-826 in its initial containment chamber. It looks much the same as it did in the archive, an ordinary bookshelf amidst extraordinary circumstances. However, in one of the early photos, you notice something that sends a chill down your spine. Leaning against the wall, partially obscured by a stack of books, is a small, framed photograph. It's the same photograph you saw in the archive.
This raises a multitude of questions. How did that photograph get from the initial containment site to the archive? What is its significance? And why does it seem to be associated with SCP-826? You search the database for any mention of the photograph, but find nothing. It's not listed as an associated object or an anomaly in itself. It's just there. A foundational principle within the SCP universe is the meticulous documentation of every detail, no matter how seemingly insignificant. The fact that this photograph is not officially documented suggests that its presence might be an anomaly in itself, or perhaps a detail that the Foundation has yet to fully understand. One peculiar aspect often encountered with SCP objects is the emergence of seemingly random or nonsensical details that later prove to be crucial. The black cat motif in the stories generated by SCP-826 could be one such detail, or perhaps the specific type of wood the bookshelf is made from. These seemingly insignificant elements often hold hidden keys to understanding the anomaly's true nature. The ongoing academic debate surrounding SCP-826 also touches upon the nature of authorship and intent. If the bookshelf generates stories, is there an author? Is it a conscious entity, or is it simply a conduit for some unknown force or dimension? The lack of a discernible pattern or influence on the generated narratives makes this question particularly challenging to answer. You decide to delve deeper into the incident logs, hoping to find some clue related to the photograph. You search for any incidents that mention visual anomalies, recurring figures, or anything that might connect to the image of the child and the shadowy figure. As you sift through the entries, one incident catches your eye. It describes a temporary containment breach where a book titled "The Boy Who Dreamed of Shadows" manifested a shadowy entity within the containment chamber. The entity was described as tall and indistinct, its features constantly shifting. It did not appear to be actively hostile, but caused intense feelings of fear and unease in personnel who came into contact with it. The log mentions that the entity vanished when the book was removed from SCP-826, leaving behind a lingering sense of cold and a faint smell of ozone. There is no mention of a child associated with this incident, but the description of the shadowy figure bears a striking resemblance to the figure in the photograph. Could the photograph be a residual image from a past manifestation of SCP-826's narratives? Could the child in the picture be someone who was affected by the bookshelf's power? You feel a growing sense of urgency. This is more than just a strange anomaly. There seems to be a story unfolding here, a hidden narrative connected to SCP-826 that the Foundation may not fully grasp. And you have a feeling that the photograph is a key piece of this puzzle. You decide to leave the terminal and return to the archive. You need to see that photograph again to try and glean any further clues from the faded image. As you make your way back to the restricted section, you can't shake the feeling that you are being drawn into the story of SCP-826 in a way you hadn't anticipated. The line between observer and participant seems to be blurring, and you wonder if you are now part of the narrative yourself. The archive seems quieter this time, the shadows less menacing. But the air still carries that faint undercurrent of mystery, the silent whispers of untold stories waiting to be unleashed. You reach the shelf where you saw the photograph. It's still there, leaning against the wall, its faded image a silent enigma. You carefully pick it up, your fingers tracing the worn edges of the frame. The child in the photograph looks to be around 7 or 8 years old, with wide, inquisitive eyes. They are surrounded by a chaotic jumble of books, some open, some stacked precariously. There's a look of intense concentration on their face, as if they are completely absorbed in the stories before them. The shadowy figure behind the child is more difficult to discern. It's tall and amorphous, its edges blurred, as if it's just out of focus, or perhaps not entirely there. You can't make out any distinct features, but there's a sense of immense presence, a feeling of something ancient and unknowable. As you stare at the photograph, you notice a faint inscription on the back of the frame. The handwriting is small and faded, but you can just make out the words, "Don't let him finish the story." A shiver runs down your spine. This isn't just a random photograph, it's a warning, a plea. But who wrote it? And who is the him they are referring to? The shadowy figure? SCP-826 itself? The implications of this message are profound. It suggests that the stories generated by the bookshelf might have a direction, an ultimate conclusion that someone desperately wanted to prevent. One of the unsettling truths about the SCP Foundation is the existence of anomalies with unknown origins and motivations. SCP-826 fits this category, its behavior seemingly random, yet potentially guided by an unseen intelligence or purpose. A recurring detail in several SCP files is the mention of individuals or groups who seem to have a deeper understanding of certain anomalies, often possessing cryptic knowledge or warnings. The inscription on the back of the photograph could be a manifestation of such hidden knowledge. The academic study of narrative often explores the concept of closure and the power of endings. The inscription, "Don't let him finish the story," suggests that the ending of a story generated by SCP-826 could have significant and potentially catastrophic consequences for reality. You carefully place the photograph back against the wall, the weight of its cryptic message heavy on your mind. You realize that your investigation into SCP-826 has just taken a much darker and more personal turn. You are no longer just an observer. You are now aware of a potential threat, a story that must not be allowed to reach its conclusion. But what can you do? You are just one person in a vast archive filled with countless anomalies. How can you possibly hope to influence the narrative of a bookshelf that can rewrite reality itself? The answer, you suspect, lies within the stories themselves. Somewhere within the countless volumes generated by SCP-826, there might be a clue, a hidden key to understanding its power, and perhaps even a way to control it. You decide to immerse yourself in the books, to delve into the strange and often unsettling narratives generated by the whispering bookshelf. It's a daunting task, but you know that you have to try. The fate of reality itself might depend on it. You begin your search by selecting some of the more recently generated books from SCP-826. Titles like The City That Bleeds Starlight, The Serpent Beneath the Ice, and The Song of Shattered Worlds seem particularly evocative, hinting at narratives with potentially significant reality-bending implications. You find a quiet corner in the archive, away from the main traffic, and settle down with the first book, The City That Bleeds Starlight. As you open it, you are immediately struck by the vividness of the prose. The language is rich and descriptive, painting a picture of a sprawling metropolis, where the very buildings weep shimmering light and the inhabitants possess strange, ethereal qualities. The story follows a lone traveler who arrives in this bizarre city seeking a lost artifact. As you read on, the narrative becomes increasingly surreal, with impossible geometries, shifting landscapes, and encounters with beings that defy conventional understanding. It's a captivating and unsettling tale, but you find no direct connection to the photograph or the warning inscription. You move on to The Serpent Beneath the Ice. This story tells of an ancient, colossal serpent imprisoned beneath a vast ice sheet. Its dreams and stirrings cause strange phenomena on the surface, including unpredictable seismic activity and the appearance of bizarre, ice-dwelling creatures. The narrative is filled with a sense of impending doom, the feeling that the serpent's awakening would bring about catastrophic consequences. Again, while the story is compelling and unsettling, you find no clear link to the photograph or the warning. Hours pass as you immerse yourself in the strange and varied narratives generated by SCP-826. Each story is unique, a self-contained world with its own rules and internal logic. Some are fantastical, others are nightmarishly surreal, and a few are disturbingly mundane. Yet all possess a subtle undercurrent of the uncanny. You begin to notice recurring themes and motifs across the different stories. Shadows that seem to have a life of their own, children with unusual abilities, and a sense of a hidden, underlying reality that is just out of reach. These recurring elements make you wonder if there is a larger, overarching narrative at play, a meta-story woven through the individual tales. One story, titled The Silent Watcher, features a shadowy figure that observes the protagonist from a distance, never interacting directly, but always present in the periphery. The description of this figure bears a striking resemblance to the shadowy figure in the photograph. However, the story offers no explanation of the Watcher's identity or purpose.
Another story, The Boy Who Could Hear the Stars, tells of a young boy with the ability to perceive cosmic whispers and omens. He is often depicted surrounded by books, seeking answers to the strange visions that plague him. This character bears a resemblance to the child in the photograph, further deepening the mystery. As you delve deeper into the narratives, you start to feel a strange connection to the stories and their characters. It's as if the boundaries between fiction and reality are beginning to blur, mirroring the very nature of SCP-826 itself. You find yourself wondering if the photograph isn't just a remnant of a past narrative, but a glimpse into a potential future, a warning of what might happen if the wrong story reaches its conclusion. One established fact about narrative is its power to shape perception and influence belief. The constant exposure to the reality-bending narratives of SCP-826 could potentially have subtle psychological effects on individuals who interact with it, blurring their sense of what is real and what is fiction. A curious detail you observe in several of the stories is the recurring mention of a specific date, October 27th. This date appears in various contexts, sometimes as a significant event within the narrative, other times as a seemingly random detail. Its significance, if any, remains unclear. The academic study of mythology and folklore often highlights the recurring archetypes and motifs that appear across different cultures and time periods. The shadowy figure and the gifted child are common archetypes in many mythologies, representing the unknown and the potential for extraordinary abilities. Their presence in the narratives of SCP-826 could tap into deep-seated human anxieties and fascinations. You come across a particularly disturbing story titled The Unfinished Page. This narrative abruptly ends mid-sentence, leaving the reader with a sense of unease and unresolved tension. The final words of the story are, "And then the shadows began to." The abrupt ending resonates with the inscription on the back of the photograph. Don't let him finish the story. Could this unfinished story be the key? Is the him in the inscription the author of this particular narrative, or perhaps the shadowy figure that seems to be a recurring presence? You feel a growing sense of urgency. You need to find out what happens after, and then the shadows began to. Is there another version of this story somewhere, or is the unfinished nature of the narrative itself the threat? You search SCP-826 for any other books that might be related to the unfinished page. You examine the titles, the covers, looking for any connection, and then you see it. Tucked away on a high shelf, almost hidden from view, is a small, unassuming notebook. Its cover is plain and unmarked, but something about it draws your attention. You carefully reach for the notebook and pull it down. As you open it, your heart leaps. The first page contains a familiar sentence, written in a spidery, almost frantic handwriting. And then the shadows began to. This is it. This is the continuation of the unfinished story. But who wrote it, and what happens next? You turn the page, your hands trembling with anticipation and a growing sense of dread. The story continues, and as you read, the pieces of the puzzle begin to fall into place. The boy from the boy who could hear the stars, the shadowy watcher from the silent watcher, and the ominous inscription on the photograph. They are all connected to this unfinished narrative. The story tells of a young boy who possesses a unique ability to perceive the underlying narratives that shape reality. He is aware of the shadowy figures that lurk just beyond the veil of perception, entities that seek to manipulate these narratives for their own inscrutable purposes. The boy discovers that one of these entities is attempting to write a story that would unravel the fabric of reality, plunging the world into chaos and shadow. The shadowy figure in the story is described as tall and indistinct, its features constantly shifting, just like the figure in the photograph. It is referred to only as the Weaver, and its goal is to complete the unfinished page, a narrative of ultimate destruction. The boy realizes that the only way to stop the Weaver is to prevent the story from being finished. He tries to intervene, to disrupt the writing process, but the Weaver is powerful and elusive. The story ends with the shadows beginning to coalesce, the Weaver poised to complete its devastating work. As you finish reading the notebook, you understand the warning on the back of the photograph. Don't let him finish the story. The him is the Weaver, the shadowy entity seeking to complete the unfinished page. The photograph is a visual representation of the characters in this crucial narrative, a silent warning passed down through the anomalies associated with SCP-826. But why was the incident log so easily accessible? And why was the photograph present in both the initial containment site and the archive? You realize that someone or something wanted you to find these clues, to understand the true nature of the threat posed by SCP-826. One of the most unsettling aspects of dealing with anomalous objects is the feeling of being manipulated, of being a pawn in a game you don't fully understand. The seemingly coincidental placement of the log in the photograph suggests a level of orchestration that is deeply disturbing. A curious detail you recall from one of the incident logs is a minor reality distortion event that occurred shortly after SCP-826 was contained. Several personnel reported briefly seeing shadowy figures in their peripheral vision, figures that matched the description of the Weaver in the unfinished page. This suggests that the narrative might have already begun to bleed into reality. The academic study of memetics explores the idea of information as a self-replicating and potentially harmful agent. The story of the unfinished page could be considered a memetic hazard, its very existence posing a threat to reality if it were to be fully realized. You look back at SCP-826, no longer seeing it as just a bookshelf. It is a conduit, a nexus point for a dangerous narrative that could unravel the world as you know it, and you now understand your role in this unfolding story. You are the one who has discovered the truth, the one who knows the danger. The question now is, what are you going to do about it? How can you stop the Weaver from finishing the story? You realize that simply understanding the threat isn't enough. You need to act to find a way to prevent the Weaver from completing the unfinished page. But how do you stop a character in a story from reaching their conclusion when the story itself is being generated by an anomalous bookshelf? Your mind races, trying to find a logical approach to an inherently illogical situation. You think back to the experiments documented in the Foundation's database. Researchers tried to influence SCP-826 by introducing other books and stimuli. Perhaps the key lies in manipulating the bookshelf itself, in introducing a counter-narrative, or somehow disrupting its ability to generate the destructive story. You scan the shelves around SCP-826, looking for a book, any book, that might offer a clue. Your eyes land on a thick, leather-bound volume with the title, The art of narrative disruption. It looks old and worn, as if it has been handled many times. Intrigued, you pull it from the shelf. As you open the book, you find that it is filled with complex theories and philosophical discussions about the nature of storytelling, the power of the author, and the ways in which narratives can be subverted or altered. It delves into concepts like metafiction, unreliable narrators, and the deliberate breaking of the fourth wall. The book argues that stories, even those that seem self-contained and immutable, are ultimately dependent on the reader's interpretation and engagement. By introducing conflicting elements or challenging the established rules of the narrative, it might be possible to alter its course or even bring it to an end. One chapter discusses the concept of narrative voids, moments in a story where the established logic breaks down, or where the author deliberately leaves gaps and ambiguities. These voids, the book suggests, can be points of vulnerability, openings through which external forces might be able to influence the narrative. You think about the unfinished page, its abrupt ending a gaping narrative void. Could this be the key? Could you somehow step into that void and disrupt the weaver's progress? The book also mentions the importance of symbolism and archetypes in storytelling. The shadowy figure of the weaver and the gifted child are powerful archetypes. Perhaps by understanding their symbolic significance, you can find a way to counteract their roles in the narrative. You remember the black cat motif that appeared in several of the stories generated by SCP-826. In many cultures, black cats are associated with mystery, intuition, and the crossing of boundaries between worlds. Could this be a symbolic element that holds some significance in the larger narrative? You decide to look for other books on SCP-826 that mention the black cat. You search the surrounding shelves and find a small, unassuming volume titled Whispers in the Shadow, a study of recurring motifs in SCP-826 narratives. As you flip through the pages, you find an entire chapter dedicated to the black cat. The author notes its consistent appearance as a guide or a harbinger of change, often appearing at crucial junctures in the stories. In one instance, a black cat leads the protagonist to a hidden object that ultimately helps them defeat a malevolent entity. Could the black cat be an ally in this unfolding narrative? Could it be a symbol of hope or a guide to disrupting the weaver's plans? You also find a section in the Art of Narrative Disruption that discusses the power of belief and intention in shaping narratives. The book suggests that if a reader or a participant in a story strongly believes in a particular outcome, that belief can sometimes influence the course of events. You realize that you are now a participant in the story of SCP-826. You know the threat, you understand the stakes, and you have a growing sense of what needs to be done. You need to believe that you can stop the Weaver, that you can disrupt the unfinished page before it reaches its devastating conclusion. You return to the shelf where you found the unfinished page notebook. You take a deep breath and open it again to the last sentence. And then the shadows began to. This is the narrative void. This is where you need to intervene. But how? You think about the photograph, the image of the child surrounded by books. The child represents knowledge, curiosity, and the power of stories. The shadowy figure represents the unknown, The destructive potential of unchecked narratives. You look at the Black Cat book again. Whispers in the shadow. A guide. A harbinger. An idea begins to form in your mind. What if you could introduce a new element into the narrative, a force that could counteract the Weaver's influence? What if you could somehow bring the symbolism of the Black Cat into the unfinished page? You search your pockets and find a small, smooth stone you picked up earlier outside the archive. It's black and feels strangely warm in your hand. It's not a cat, but it's black, and it's something tangible from the outside world, something real that you can introduce into the fictional space of the narrative. With a sense of purpose, you carefully place the black stone on the page of the notebook right after the unfinished sentence. It's a small act, but it feels significant, a deliberate disruption of the intended narrative flow. You close the notebook and place it back on the shelf. You don't know if it will work, if this small intervention will be enough to stop the Weaver, but you have to try. You step back from SCP-826, your heart pounding with a mixture of hope and anxiety. You wait, watching the unassuming bookshelf, wondering if anything will change. For a long moment, nothing happens. The archive remains silent, the shadows still. You begin to feel a sense of doubt. Had you been foolish to think that such a small act could have any effect on such a powerful anomaly? And then you notice a change. A faint shimmer of light emanates from the shelf where the unfinished page notebook rests. The air around SCP-826 seems to crackle with a subtle energy. You cautiously approach the bookshelf again. You reach for the notebook and open it. The page with the unfinished sentence and the black stone is still there. But beneath it, in the same spidery handwriting, a new sentence has appeared. But a shadow, sleek and black as night, stepped into the light, its eyes like emeralds, and watched. A wave of relief washes over you. The narrative has changed. The Black Cat, or at least its symbolic representation, has entered the story. It is now a watcher, a potential protector, a disruption to the Weaver's solitary control. You don't know what will happen next, how this new element will influence the rest of the story. But you have bought time. You have introduced a force of opposition. The story is no longer solely the Weaver's to control. You look at the photograph again, the image of the child and the shadowy figure. The child seems to be looking directly at you now, a faint hint of a smile on their face. The shadowy figure remains indistinct, but there's a sense of hesitation in its posture, as if it has been momentarily thrown off balance. You realize that the story of SCP-826 is not yet over. Your intervention has created a new chapter, an uncertain future. But for now, the immediate threat seems to have been averted. The Weaver has not finished the story. One of the enduring lessons of the SCP Foundation is that even the most dangerous anomalies can sometimes be influenced by unexpected means. Understanding the underlying principles, even if they are not entirely scientific, can be the key to containment and control. A curious detail you now recognize is the subtle scent of ozone that seems to linger around SCP-826, particularly after a narrative shift. This could be a byproduct of the reality-bending forces at play. The ongoing academic discussion surrounding SCP-826 might now shift to the potential for external influence on anomalous narratives. Your actions have provided a real-world example of how a seemingly insignificant intervention can have a profound impact on a story generated by an SCP object. You take one last look at the bookshelf, the silent storyteller that holds the fate of reality in its pages. You don't know what the future holds, what other stories SCP-826 might generate. But for now, you have played your part. You have listened to the whispers, understood the warning, and stepped into the narrative. The archive seems less menacing now, the silence no longer quite so heavy. There is a sense of possibility in the air, the feeling that even in the face of the unknown, hope and intervention are still possible. You turn to leave the restricted section, the image of the black shadow with emerald eyes a comforting presence in your mind. The story of the unfinished page is still unfolding, but for the first time, it feels like there might be a different ending. Now let your mind drift. Imagine the gentle lapping of waves against a shore, a soft, rhythmic sound that washes away the day's worries. Feel the cool, smooth sand between your toes as you walk along the water's edge. The sun is setting in the distance, painting the sky in hues of orange, pink, and lavender. The air is still and peaceful, carrying only the faint scent of salt and the distant cry of a seagull. Each breath you take is slow and deep, filling your lungs with calm and tranquility. The images of the archive, the unsettling stories, the shadowy figures, they begin to fade like wisps of smoke carried away by a gentle breeze. There is only the sound of the waves, the feel of the sand, the beautiful colors of the twilight sky. Your eyelids feel heavy, and a sense of profound relaxation washes over you. The tension in your muscles melts away, and your body feels light and comfortable. Allow yourself to sink deeper into this feeling of peace, knowing that you are safe and secure. The stories of the day are over, and now it is time for rest. Let your thoughts drift and your mind become still. Hey everyone, tonight we're diving deep into the annals of the SCP Foundation, that sprawling, shadowy organization dedicated to securing, containing, and protecting the world from anomalies beyond our wildest comprehension. Picture this. You're nestled in your bed, the soft glow of your device illuminating the familiar shapes of your room. Maybe a gentle breeze drifts in through the window, carrying the distant hum of city life, or perhaps the comforting silence of the countryside envelops you. You're probably thinking about the day you had, the tasks ahead, maybe even what you're going to have for breakfast. Little do you know, just beyond the veil of our mundane reality, things exist that would make your wildest nightmares seem like a Disney movie. Honestly, you probably wouldn't last 5 minutes in some of the containment chambers we're about to discuss. So before you get too comfortable, take a quick moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy the strange and unsettling tales I spin here. And while you're at it, drop a comment below and tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories reach across the globe. Now dim the lights, turn on that fan for some soothing white noise, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing in a long, sterile corridor. The walls are a uniform shade of gray, the only breaks in the monotony being the occasional reinforced steel door with blinking indicator lights above them. A low hum permeates the air, a constant thrumming that vibrates subtly beneath your feet. It smells faintly of ozone and something vaguely metallic, like old machinery that hasn't been properly cleaned. You can hear the distant clatter of keyboards and the muffled voices of unseen personnel. This is Site 19, one of the Foundation's largest and most secretive facilities. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, and you don't really have a choice, do you, is to delve into the perplexing history surrounding a seemingly innocuous object, SCP-002, also known as the Living Room. The official documentation describes SCP-002 as a mass of organic and inorganic material, roughly spherical in shape, with a volume of approximately 60 cubic meters. Its surface is rough and fleshy, interspersed with what appear to be furniture and doorways. Yes, you read that correctly. Furniture and doorways, embedded within a pulsating biological mass. Foundation scientists have determined that SCP-002 grows slowly over time, absorbing any living organisms that come into close proximity. These organisms are then somehow converted and integrated into its structure, often manifesting as new pieces of furniture or architectural features within the anomaly. One of the earliest recorded incidents involving SCP-002 details a team of researchers attempting to analyze a newly formed armchair within its structure. As they took samples, the armchair began to writhe and groan, eventually expelling a viscous fluid that was later identified as heavily mutated human tissue. Needless to say, the research team was swiftly reassigned to less sentient projects. This leads to one of the many ethical quandaries that plague the Foundation. At what point does an anomaly cease to be an object and become something deserving of rights, or at least a degree of moral consideration? The ongoing debate about the ethics of toasters within the Foundation, while seemingly absurd, touches upon this very issue. If an inanimate object begins to exhibit lifelike properties, even if in a horrifying and parasitic way, how should it be treated? You cautiously approach one of the reinforced doors. A small keypad is located to the right. You don't know the code, and frankly, you're not sure you want to. The thought of what lies beyond these doors, the sheer alienness of the objects contained within, sends a shiver down your spine. You can almost feel the weight of the secrets held within these walls, the countless containment breaches, the sacrifices made to keep these anomalies from the eyes of the oblivious world outside. It's a world where the laws of physics are mere suggestions, where the impossible is commonplace, and where a seemingly ordinary toaster might just be the key to understanding the very fabric of reality, or its horrifying unraveling. You decide to move on, the image of the pulsating armchair still lingering in your mind. Further down the corridor, you notice a viewing window into one of the containment chambers. Hesitantly, you peer inside. The room is dimly lit, and in the center sits a large metallic sphere suspended by thick chains. Strange symbols are etched across its surface, glowing faintly with an internal light. This is SCP-184, known as the Architect. SCP-184 is an inanimate metallic sphere, approximately 30 centimeters in diameter. When placed within an enclosed structure, it begins to expand the interior space of that structure, seemingly without limit, creating bizarre and often nonsensical architectural additions. These additions can include impossible geometries, rooms filled with water despite no apparent source, and corridors that twist and turn into infinity. The rate of expansion increases over time, and the structures created often exhibit a distinct and unsettling aesthetic, characterized by smooth, metallic surfaces and a pervasive sense of wrongness. Interestingly, the Foundation discovered SCP-184 in an abandoned urban area in China. The entire district had been warped and expanded into a labyrinthine cityscape, defying all known principles of construction and spatial reasoning. It took a significant amount of resources and specialized personnel to safely contain SCP-184 and revert the affected area back to its original state, a process that was not entirely successful, as subtle spatial anomalies still persist in certain locations within the former containment zone. This incident highlights a crucial aspect of the Foundation's work. Containment is not always a permanent solution, and the effects of anomalies can linger long after they are supposedly secured. As you observe SCP-184, you can't help but wonder about the nature of its abilities. Is it manipulating space itself? Is it tapping into some other dimension or reality? Or is it something else entirely, something beyond our current understanding of physics and geometry? The truth, as is often the case within the Foundation, remains elusive. What is known is that prolonged exposure to SCP-184's effects can have detrimental psychological consequences, with individuals reporting feelings of disorientation, paranoia, and a creeping sense that the very walls around them are shifting and changing. You pull yourself away from the window, a sense of unease settling in your stomach. The sheer scale and incomprehensibility of these anomalies are starting to weigh on you. It's a stark reminder that the world we perceive is just a sliver of a much larger and far stranger reality. And somewhere within this reality, the debate about the ethical implications of sentient toasters continues to rage in Foundation break rooms, a bizarre counterpoint to the cosmic horrors they contain. Moving deeper into Site 19, you find yourself in a section dedicated to more biological anomalies. The air here is noticeably different, thicker, and carrying a faint, sweet odor that you can't quite place. You pass by several containment cells, each with its own array of monitoring equipment and hazard warnings. One cell is marked with the biohazard symbol and the chilling designation SCP-049, the Plague Doctor. SCP-049 is a humanoid entity, roughly 1.9 meters in height, with the appearance of a medieval plague doctor. Its iconic mask, the long beak and empty eye sockets, is not a garment, but rather a part of its biological structure. Similarly, the thick, dark robes and leather gloves it wears seem to be integrated into its skin. While its origins are unknown, SCP-049 possesses a disturbing obsession with what it refers to as the pestilence, an unspecified disease that it believes it can cure. When SCP-49 comes into contact with living humans, it invariably attempts to cure them through a gruesome surgical procedure. This procedure typically involves the use of crude, antique surgical tools that materialize from within its body. The outcome of these surgeries is invariably fatal, and the subjects are transformed into zombie-like entities that SCP-049 refers to as cured. These entities are highly aggressive and will attempt to attack any uninfected individuals. Foundation researchers have spent considerable time studying SCP-049, attempting to understand its motivations and the nature of the pestilence it so vehemently seeks to eradicate. However, SCP-049 is highly intelligent and communicative, often engaging in conversations with researchers, but its explanations of the pestilence are vague and often nonsensical. It speaks in archaic language and expresses a firm belief in the efficacy of its methods, despite the consistently fatal results. One particularly unsettling aspect of SCP-049 is its ability to seemingly sense the presence of the pestilence in individuals, even when no discernible symptoms are present. It will often fixate on a subject, declaring them infected and insisting on performing its cure. This has led to numerous containment breaches and casualties among Foundation personnel. The existence of SCP-49 raises profound questions about the nature of disease, consciousness, and the very definition of life and death. Is the pestilence a real biological threat, or is it a delusion within SCP-049's mind? And what does its ability to reanimate the dead, albeit in a horrific and aggressive form, tell us about the fundamental processes of life? These are questions that continue to baffle and disturb the researchers at Site-19. You quickly move past SCP-049's containment cell, the image of the masked figure and its grotesque surgical tools sending a wave of nausea through you. The sweet, sickly odor in the air seems to intensify, and you can't shake the feeling that you've lingered too long in this section of the facility. The ethical debate about toasters suddenly seems almost comforting in its absurdity compared to the horrors you've just witnessed. You find yourself in a slightly less oppressive area of Site-19, a research lab filled with humming computers and the soft clinking of glassware. Here, the focus seems to be on understanding the more conceptual anomalies. On one of the lab benches, you see a series of intricate drawings and diagrams centered around a small, unassuming metal key. This is SCP-005, Skeleton Key. SCP-005 has the appearance of an ornate skeleton key, seemingly made of brass. However, its anomalous property is that it is capable of opening any and all forms of mechanical locking mechanism. This includes standard door locks, handcuffs, safes, and even more complex security systems. The key appears to function regardless of the manufacturer, the complexity of the locking mechanism, or whether the lock is even designed to be opened by a key. The Foundation's acquisition of SCP-05 was relatively straightforward. It was discovered in the possession of a petty thief who had used it to commit a string of seemingly impossible burglaries. The thief was apprehended without incident, and SCP-005 was quickly secured. Initial testing confirmed its extraordinary capabilities, and it was classified as Safe Class, meaning it is relatively easy to contain as long as it is not actively used. Despite its seemingly benign nature, SCP-05 presents some interesting theoretical challenges. How does it bypass the intricate mechanisms of even the most advanced locks? Does it manipulate the physical structure of the lock itself, or does it somehow interact with the very concept of locking? Researchers have proposed various theories, ranging from microscopic shape-shifting abilities to some form of localized reality manipulation, but the exact mechanism remains unknown. One particularly intriguing aspect of SCP-05 is that it appears to adapt to new locking technologies. When presented with a lock it has never encountered before, it may take a few moments, but it will invariably find a way to open it. This suggests that the key possesses some form of adaptive intelligence, or perhaps operates on a fundamental principle of unlocking that transcends specific designs. While SCP-05 is primarily used by the Foundation for emergency access and security overrides, its existence raises questions about the nature of security itself. If a single object can bypass any lock, what does that say about our reliance on physical barriers? It also touches upon the idea of universal solutions and the potential for seemingly simple objects to possess extraordinary and unpredictable powers. As you examine the drawings of SCP-05, you can't help but feel a sense of wonder at its elegant simplicity. In a world filled with grotesque biological anomalies and reality-bending artifacts, a key that simply unlocks anything seems almost quaint. Yet its implications are far-reaching, hinting at underlying principles of the universe that we are only beginning to glimpse. And somewhere, a researcher is probably still trying to figure out if SCP-05 can open a particularly stubborn brand of tamper-proof packaging, adding another bizarre footnote to the Foundation's endless quest to understand the anomalous. Your attention is drawn to a nearby computer terminal, displaying a series of cryptic messages and complex mathematical equations. The file is labeled Project Heimdall, and it seems to be related to a phenomenon known as SCP-076, or ABLE. SCP-076 is a humanoid entity contained within a large, reinforced cube made of an unknown black substance. The cube is virtually indestructible and is kept locked at all times. However, periodically SCP-076 will enter a dormant state, its body becoming inert. During these periods, the inner coffin-like compartment within the cube can be opened. Inside lies SCP-076-2, a highly aggressive and incredibly dangerous humanoid entity. When SCP-076-2 awakens, it possesses superhuman strength, speed, and endurance. It is also capable of spontaneously generating bladed weapons from an unknown extra-dimensional source. These weapons are incredibly sharp and durable, capable of cutting through almost any material. SCP-076-2 exhibits extreme hostility towards all living beings and will relentlessly pursue and attack anyone it encounters. The Foundation has a long and bloody history with SCP-076. It has breached containment multiple times, resulting in significant casualties among personnel. Recontainment procedures are complex and dangerous, often requiring specialized teams and heavy weaponry. The only reliable method of temporarily neutralizing SCP-076-2 is to inflict massive physical trauma, forcing it back into its dormant state within the cube. Project Heimdall, as indicated by the files on the terminal, seems to be a long-term research initiative focused on understanding the nature of SCP-076 and, more ambitiously, finding a way to permanently neutralize it. The cryptic messages appear to be fragmented research notes, detailing various attempts to study SCP-076-2 during its brief periods of activity. The mathematical equations likely relate to attempts to predict its awakening cycles and the nature of its extra-dimensional weapon generation. One particularly unsettling note mentions the possibility that SCP-076-2 is not merely a violent entity, but possesses a form of ancient intelligence, perhaps even a connection to some primordial force or entity. This theory is based on fragmented accounts of SCP-06-2 occasionally uttering words in dead languages and exhibiting tactical awareness during containment breaches that seems beyond mere instinct. The existence of SCP-076 raises profound questions about the origins of violence and aggression. Is it a naturally occurring phenomenon, a product of some ancient curse, or something else entirely? And what are the implications of its ability to generate weapons seemingly from nothing? Does it tap into some fundamental aspect of reality that allows for the instantaneous creation of matter and energy? As you scan the Project Heimdall files, a sense of dread washes over you. SCP-076 is not just a contained anomaly. It feels like a primal force held precariously at bay. The thought that it could awaken at any moment and unleash its unimaginable violence is deeply disturbing. It makes you wonder about the true extent of the threats the Foundation faces and the sacrifices made to keep them contained. And somewhere in the quieter corners of Site-19, the debate about the ethical implications of a toaster that can predict the stock market probably seems like a welcome distraction. You stumble upon a dimly lit archive filled with rows upon rows of dusty files and forgotten reports. The air is thick with the smell of aged paper and a faint hint of mildew. This section seems dedicated to anomalies of a more informational nature. One file, marked with faded yellow tape and the designation SCP-055, catches your eye. However, beneath the designation is a handwritten note. What was SCP-055? This simple question sends a shiver of unease down your spine. You open the file, but it's almost entirely blank. There are a few scattered notes, mostly illegible scribbles, and vague statements like, "It's not round," and "We have no record of its appearance." The official containment procedures are equally unhelpful, simply stating that SCP-055 is contained within Site-19, but providing no details about its appearance, properties, or how it was contained. The mystery surrounding SCP-055 is one of the Foundation's most enduring and perplexing. It is an anomaly that seems to actively resist being remembered or understood. Anyone who comes into direct contact with SCP-055 will immediately forget any details about it shortly after the encounter. This effect is not a deliberate memetic hazard. It seems to be an intrinsic property of the anomaly itself. Due to this memory-erasing effect, the Foundation has very little reliable information about SCP-055. No photographs, videos, or detailed descriptions exist. Even personnel who have worked directly with its containment seem unable to recall any specific details about it. The handwritten note on the file, "What was SCP-055? Xerania," is a common sentiment among those who have encountered its documentation, a fleeting awareness that something important is missing from their understanding. The implications of SCP-055's properties are profound. It suggests the existence of phenomena that can actively manipulate or erase memory on a fundamental level. How is this possible? What is the nature of an object that can so effectively resist cognition? Some researchers speculate that SCP-055 might be a form of anti-concept, something that our minds are inherently unable to process or retain. Others believe it might be a being from another dimension or reality, operating under principles that are completely alien to our own. The fact that SCP-055 is contained at all is a testament to the Foundation's ingenuity. While individual memories of the anomaly fade, the collective awareness of its existence and the need for its containment persists. Containment procedures reportedly involve a specific arrangement of other SCP objects, the exact nature of which is, of course, unrecorded. As you stare at the blank pages, in the SCP-055 file, you feel a frustrating sense of something just beyond your grasp. You know that this anomaly is significant, that it represents a fundamental challenge to our understanding of reality and memory. Yet the details remain stubbornly elusive, lost in the fog of its anomalous effect. It's a chilling reminder that there are things in the universe that may be inherently unknowable, forever existing just outside the boundaries of human comprehension. And somewhere in Site 19, someone probably just forgot what kind of coffee they ordered, a mundane consequence of the same reality that harbors such profound mysteries. You move on from the unsettling enigma of SCP-055, finding yourself in a section dedicated to anomalies that blur the lines between reality and fiction. Here, you encounter a file labeled SCP-963, Immortality. The file details a small, intricately carved gold amulet, approximately 4 centimeters in diameter, containing a single, perfectly cut ruby. This amulet is the key to SCP-963's anomalous property. It confers a form of functional immortality upon its wearer. When a living being comes into direct skin contact with SCP-963, their consciousness is transferred into the amulet. The original body typically ceases all biological functions shortly thereafter. The consciousness within the amulet thus remains dormant until the amulet comes into contact with another living being. At that point, the consciousness within SCP-963 transfers to the new host body, effectively overriding the original host's mind. The individual whose consciousness is transferred into a new host retains all their memories, personality traits, and skills. This process can be repeated indefinitely, making the consciousness within SCP-963 effectively immortal, albeit dependent on physical contact with living hosts. SCP-963 was discovered in the possession of Dr. Jack Bright, a Foundation researcher who was involved in a catastrophic containment breach. Dr. Bright made contact with the amulet during the incident, resulting in the transfer of his consciousness. Since then, Dr. Bright's consciousness has been transferred to numerous host bodies whenever SCP-963 comes into contact with a living subject. Due to the inherent risks associated with SCP-963's ability to transfer consciousness, the amulet is typically kept in the possession of a designated host under strict supervision. The host body is regularly rotated to mitigate the long-term psychological effects of being controlled by Dr. Bright's consciousness. The existence of SCP-963 raises profound ethical and philosophical questions about the nature of identity, consciousness, and mortality. Is the consciousness within the amulet truly the original individual, or is it merely a copy or an echo? What are the ethical implications of overwriting one person's mind with another? And does the continuous transfer of consciousness constitute true immortality, or is it simply a prolonged existence in borrowed bodies? Dr. Bright, in his various host bodies, has become a unique and often controversial figure within the Foundation. His long history and first-hand experience with numerous anomalies have made him a valuable asset, but his occasional disregard for protocol and his macabre sense of humor, possibly exacerbated by his unusual existence, have also made him a source of concern. As you read about SCP-963, you contemplate the allure and the terror of immortality. The desire to escape death is a fundamental human drive, but the prospect of an endless existence, constantly shifting between different bodies raises unsettling questions about what it means to be oneself. And somewhere in the Foundation, Dr. Bright, in his current host, is probably making a darkly humorous comment about outliving the latest office coffee machine. You find yourself in a section of Site-19 that feels strangely out of place. The sterile gray walls have been replaced by what appears to be an ordinary office break room, complete with a coffee machine, a water cooler, and a bulletin board covered in mundane notices. However, one object stands out: a seemingly ordinary toaster sitting on a small counter. This is SCP-426, the toaster. The anomaly of SCP-426 is deceptively simple, yet profoundly unsettling. Any individual who perceives or interacts with SCP-426 will invariably refer to themselves in the first person plural. For example, if you were to see SCP-426, you might suddenly think, "We are sitting on a counter," or "We need to be cleaned." This effect is persistent and extends to all forms of communication, written or verbal. The Foundation's initial attempts to understand SCP-426 were understandably confusing. Reports from personnel consistently referred to themselves as "we," making it difficult to ascertain individual observations and experiences. It took some time for researchers to realize that the toaster itself was the source of this linguistic anomaly. Despite extensive testing, the mechanism behind SCP-426's effect remains unknown. It does not appear to emit any detectable radiation or possess any other obvious anomalous properties. Its appearance is that of a standard four-slice toaster, slightly older but otherwise unremarkable. Disassembling SCP-426 reveals no unusual internal components. The containment procedures for SCP-426 are relatively straightforward. It is kept in a locked room with minimal interaction. Personnel assigned to its containment are rotated frequently to mitigate the psychological effects of constantly referring to themselves in the plural. The existence of SCP-426 raises fascinating questions about the nature of language, identity, and perception. How can a simple appliance alter such a fundamental aspect of human consciousness? Does it somehow tap into a collective unconscious, or does it manipulate the very structure of thought and language? One particularly bizarre incident involved a researcher who spent an extended period studying SCP-426. Upon being transferred to another project, they continued to refer to themselves in the plural for several weeks, even when not in the vicinity of the toaster. This suggests that the effect can have lasting psychological consequences. The ongoing debate about the ethics of toasters within the Foundation, which you've heard mentioned before, likely originated with SCP-426. The seemingly innocuous nature of the object, coupled with its profound and inexplicable effect on human identity, makes it a prime subject for philosophical discussions, however absurd they may seem on the surface. As you look at the ordinary toaster, you can't help but feel a sense of unease. It's a reminder that even the most mundane objects can harbor extraordinary and unsettling anomalies. And somewhere in Site-19, someone is probably complaining that we burned their toast. You find yourself in a deeper level of Site-19, the air growing colder and the lighting more sparse. This section seems dedicated to anomalies with potentially catastrophic implications. You approach a massive steel door with multiple locking mechanisms and flashing red lights. The designation above reads SCP-682, the hard-to-destroy reptile. The file on SCP-682 is thick and filled with alarming incident reports. SCP-682 is a large, vaguely reptilian creature of unknown origin. It is incredibly intelligent, possesses immense physical strength and speed, and has demonstrated the ability to adapt to and survive virtually any form of damage or attack. SCP-682 exhibits extreme hostility towards all forms of life. It constantly attempts to breach containment and has caused numerous large-scale containment failures, resulting in significant loss of life and extensive damage to Foundation facilities. Attempts to terminate SCP-682 have been unsuccessful, with the creature surviving exposure to extreme temperatures, corrosive substances, reality-altering anomalies, and even direct attacks from other powerful SCPs. One particularly disturbing aspect of SCP-682 is its apparent ability to adapt its biological structure to counter any threat it faces. If attacked with fire, it might develop fire-resistant scales. If exposed to a corrosive acid, its skin might evolve to neutralize the substance. This adaptability makes it an incredibly dangerous and unpredictable anomaly. Containment procedures for SCP-682 are extensive and constantly evolving. It is currently held in a high-security containment chamber filled with hydrochloric acid, which seems to be one of the few substances that can slow its regeneration. However, even this is not a permanent solution, as SCP-682 has shown the ability to survive prolonged exposure and even develop resistance. The Foundation has considered numerous extreme measures to deal with SCP-682, including attempting to transfer it to other hostile dimensions or exposing it to reality-erasing anomalies. However, the potential risks associated with these attempts are deemed too high, as there is no guarantee of success, and the possibility of further escalating the threat is significant. The existence of SCP-682 poses a fundamental challenge to the Foundation's mission of containment. It is an anomaly that seems inherently uncontainable, a force of pure destruction that defies all attempts at control. Researchers continue to study it, hoping to find some weakness or vulnerability, but so far, all efforts have been futile. The ethical implications of containing SCP-682 are also a subject of debate. Is it morally justifiable to keep such a dangerous entity alive, knowing the constant threat it poses to humanity? Some argue that its potential for study outweighs the risks, while others believe that all efforts should be focused on finding a way to permanently eliminate it. As you stand before the containment chamber of SCP-682, you can almost feel the raw power and hatred emanating from within. The thought of what this creature is capable of is deeply unsettling. It's a stark reminder that not all anomalies can be understood or controlled, and some may simply represent an existential threat to the world. And somewhere, a researcher is probably nervously checking the structural integrity of the toaster containment cell, a small comfort in the face of such overwhelming danger. Moving away from the terrifying presence of SCP-682, you find yourself in a quieter section of the facility, dedicated to anomalies that affect the human mind. You enter a room filled with comfortable chairs and soft lighting, an unusual setting within the sterile environment of Site-19. On a nearby table, you see a pair of simple, black-framed sunglasses. This is SCP-148, the telekill alloy. SCP-148 is a metallic alloy composed of several rare and unknown elements. Its primary anomalous property is its ability to passively block or negate a wide range of psychic or mental influences. Individuals wearing objects made of SCP-148 are largely immune to telepathic communication, mind control, and other forms of extrasensory perception. The discovery of SCP-148 was accidental. It was initially found as a small, oddly dense meteorite fragment. During analysis, researchers noticed that individuals handling the fragment reported a strange sense of mental clarity and an inability to hear the thoughts of others, even those known to possess telepathic abilities. Further investigation led to the realization of its unique properties. The Foundation quickly recognized the potential applications of SCP-148 for protecting personnel from cognitohazards and mind-altering anomalies. Objects made from the alloy, such as the sunglasses you see, are often issued to researchers and security personnel working with particularly dangerous mental influences. However, SCP-148 also has some drawbacks. Prolonged exposure to the alloy can lead to a dulling of emotions and a sense of detachment from others. It can also interfere with beneficial psychic abilities, making communication with certain cooperative SCPs difficult. Furthermore, the alloy is extremely rare and difficult to synthesize, making its use somewhat limited. The existence of SCP-148 raises interesting questions about the nature of consciousness and the possibility of psychic phenomena. Does it block a specific type of energy or wave that carries mental information, or does it somehow alter the brain's ability to receive and process such signals? The exact mechanism remains unknown. One particularly intriguing application of SCP-148 is its potential use in developing defenses against mimetic agents, information that can spread and influence minds like a virus. While not a perfect countermeasure, SCP-148 can significantly reduce the effectiveness of some mimetic hazards. As you examine the black sunglasses, you can't help but wonder what it would be like to experience the world without the constant barrage of mental noise that might exist if psychic abilities were more widespread. The idea of a pure, unfiltered consciousness is both appealing and slightly unsettling. And somewhere in Site 19, someone wearing SCP-148 sunglasses is probably blissfully unaware of the intense debate happening around them about the optimal way to brew decaf coffee. Your attention shifts to a series of containment cells housing objects that seem to defy the very laws of physics. One cell contains a small, intricately folded piece of paper labeled SCP-823, Carnivorous Origami. SCP-823 appears to be a piece of origami folded into the shape of a crane. However, it exhibits a predatory behavior, actively seeking out and consuming living organisms. When a living creature comes within a certain radius of SCP-823, the origami crane will unfold and propel itself towards the target with surprising speed. Its paper edges become razor sharp, capable of slicing through flesh and bone. Once it has made contact, SCP-823 will begin to consume the organism, its paper structure somehow absorbing and integrating biological matter. The process is often described as gruesome and unsettling, with the origami crane slowly expanding and contorting as it digests its prey. The origins of SCP-823 are unknown. It was discovered in an abandoned art studio, surrounded by numerous partially consumed animal carcasses. Initial attempts to destroy SCP-823 through conventional means proved unsuccessful. It is resistant to fire, crushing forces, and even attempts to unfold it manually, with the paper edges proving dangerously sharp. Containment procedures for SCP-823 involve keeping it in a reinforced glass enclosure with no living organisms allowed within its effective radius. Automated feeding systems using non-living organic material have been developed to prevent breaches due to starvation. The existence of SCP-823 raises bizarre questions about the nature of life and matter. How can a simple piece of folded paper exhibit biological behaviors? Does it possess some form of anomalous animation, or is it interacting with fundamental forces in ways we don't understand? One particularly unsettling theory suggests that SCP-823 might be a remnant of some form of extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional life that operates on entirely different principles than terrestrial biology. Its paper-like structure could be a form of cellular organization that we are simply unable to comprehend. The implications of such an anomaly are disturbing. If simple paper can become a predatory organism, what other seemingly inert materials might harbor similar hidden potential? It challenges our fundamental assumptions about the boundaries between the living and the non-living. As you observe the seemingly delicate origami crane within its containment cell, you can't help but feel a sense of profound unease. Its stillness belies its deadly nature, a silent predator waiting for an opportunity. And somewhere in Site 19, someone is probably carefully considering the potential hazards of paper cuts in the vicinity of other, more obviously dangerous, anomalies. You then find yourself in a section dedicated to temporal anomalies. In the center of a heavily shielded room sits a grandfather clock of ornate design, its hands frozen at precisely 12 o'clock. This is SCP-1733, Season 3. SCP-1733 appears to be an antique grandfather clock. However, its anomalous property manifests once a year, specifically on the night of a particular televised sporting event, the specifics of which are redacted in the file, likely due to its mimetic potential. During this annual event, the interior of the clock becomes a temporary recording of the event as it originally aired. Individuals who observe the interior of SCP-1733 during this time will see a ghostly replay of the sporting event. The figures within the clock appear translucent and silent, moving in a perpetual loop of the broadcast. What is particularly disturbing is that the figures within the clock seem to be aware of outside observers. They have been observed to turn and look directly at viewers, even attempting to communicate through gestures or by holding up signs that briefly appear within the clock's display. These attempts at communication often become increasingly frantic and desperate as the replay progresses, with the figures seemingly aware of their trapped existence within the temporal loop. Researchers have documented instances of the figures mouthing words, pointing to unseen elements within the clock, and even displaying signs of distress or injury that were not part of the original broadcast. The Foundation's understanding of SCP-1733 is limited. It is unclear how the clock captures and replays these events, or why the figures within seem to possess a form of awareness. Theories range from the clock being a window into an alternate timeline to it being a device that somehow traps residual psychic energy from the event. Containment procedures for SCP-1733 involve keeping it in a Faraday cage to prevent any external signals from interfering with its temporal properties. Access is strictly limited to the annual observation period, and researchers are instructed to maintain a safe distance and avoid any attempts at direct interaction with the figures within. The existence of SCP-1733 raises unsettling questions about the nature of time, consciousness, and reality. Does it suggest that past events retain some form of energetic imprint? Are the figures within truly the remnants of the individuals who participated in the original event, trapped in a perpetual cycle? And if so, what are they trying to communicate? The increasingly desperate attempts of the figures within the clock to interact with observers are particularly disturbing. It suggests a level of suffering and awareness within the anomaly that is difficult to reconcile with our understanding of temporal phenomena. It's a chilling reminder that even seemingly passive anomalies can harbor profound and unsettling mysteries. And somewhere in Site 19, someone is probably checking the batteries in the break room clock, a mundane concern that pales in comparison to the temporal prison contained within SCP-1733. Your journey through Site 19 continues, leading you to a section dedicated to anomalies that defy conventional understanding of life and death. You stand before a containment chamber holding a collection of seemingly ordinary human skeletal remains. This is SCP-217, Coffee Machine. The designation is immediately jarring, and the file quickly clarifies the anomaly. SCP-217 is not the skeletal remains themselves, but rather a biological agent, a microscopic organism that causes the gradual transformation of metallic objects into complex biological structures resembling bone and organic tissue. When SCP-217 comes into contact with metal, it begins a slow but inexorable process of converting the material. The metal is replaced by a substance that microscopically resembles bone, complete with marrow-like structures and even rudimentary blood vessels. The resulting biological structures often retain the original shape and function of the metallic objects, albeit in a disturbingly organic form. The skeletal remains in the containment chamber are the result of SCP-217's interaction with various metallic objects over time. Tools, machinery, even sections of containment walls have been transformed into grotesque, bone-like structures. The process is irreversible and seemingly unstoppable once initiated. The origins of SCP-217 are unknown. It was first discovered when a routine maintenance check on a Foundation storage locker revealed that the metallic contents had been replaced by organic material. Further investigation identified the microscopic agent responsible. Containment procedures for SCP-217 are extremely strict. All metallic objects within its containment zone must be coated with specialized non-reactive polymers. Personnel entering the area must wear full hazmat suits and undergo rigorous decontamination procedures to prevent the spread of the agent. The existence of SCP-217 raises profound questions about the nature of life, matter, and transformation. How can a biological agent convert inorganic metal into complex organic tissue? Does it rewrite the fundamental molecular structure of the metal, or does it somehow introduce biological processes at a subatomic level? The mechanisms behind SCP-217 remain a mystery. One particularly unsettling aspect of SCP-217 is its potential for widespread contamination. If it were to escape containment and come into contact with the vast amounts of metal used in modern infrastructure, the consequences could be catastrophic. Buildings could transform into pulsating masses of bone, vehicles could become immobile skeletal husks, and the very fabric of our technological society could unravel. As you look at the bone-like remains that were once tools and machinery, you feel a deep sense of unease. It's a chilling reminder of the fragility of our material world and the potential for the biological and the mechanical to merge in horrifying and unpredictable ways. And somewhere in Site 19, someone is probably very carefully cleaning the coffee machine, making sure it remains stubbornly metallic. You find yourself in a high-security sublevel of Site 19, the air thick with a palpable sense of dread and secrecy. This section is dedicated to anomalies that pose existential threats to reality itself. You stand before a reinforced vault door, its surface covered in intricate symbols and multiple locking mechanisms. This is the containment for SCP-3008, a perfectly normal, regular old IKEA. The file on SCP-3008 describes an anomaly that appears to be a large retail unit of IKEA, a popular furniture store chain. However, the interior space of SCP-3008 exhibits a number of disturbing anomalies. Firstly, the interior space is non-Euclidean and appears to be infinitely large, with no discernible walls or exits. Individuals entering SCP-3008 become lost in its seemingly endless maze of furniture showrooms and storage areas. Secondly, SCP-3008 is populated by humanoid entities referred to as SCP-3008-2. These entities resemble distorted and elongated IKEA employees with pale skin and vacant eyes. During daytime within SCP-3008, when the interior lighting is consistent with normal store hours, these entities are passive and wander aimlessly. However, during nighttime, when the lights flicker and go out, they become highly aggressive and will attack any living beings they encounter. The interior of SCP-3008 also exhibits a temporal anomaly. The day-night cycle within the store does not correspond to the outside world and appears to be erratic and unpredictable. Survivors who have managed to exit SCP-3008 report spending days, weeks, or even months inside with no clear sense of how much time has passed outside. The Foundation became aware of SCP-3008 after reports of individuals entering an IKEA store late at night and never being seen again. Initial investigation revealed the anomalous spatial properties of the interior and the hostile entities within. Attempts to map the interior have been unsuccessful due to its infinite nature. Containment procedures for SCP-3008 primarily focus on preventing entry. The exterior of the anomalous IKEA appears normal, and the main challenge is to deter civilians from entering after closing hours. Foundation personnel disguised as security guards are stationed around the perimeter, and various disinformation campaigns are in place to explain any disappearances. The existence of SCP-3008 raises terrifying questions about the nature of reality and dimensionality. Where does the infinite space within the store lead? Are the SCP 3008 2 entities failed shoppers or something far more sinister? And what is the significance of the seemingly ordinary IKEA setting for such a profound anomaly? The thought of being trapped in an endless hostile retail space, stalked by distorted figures in the flickering darkness, is deeply unsettling. It's a mundane nightmare made real, a perversion of the familiar comfort of consumerism. And somewhere in Site 19, someone is probably still trying to assemble a piece of IKEA furniture, blissfully unaware of the infinite horrors contained within its anomalous counterpart. You move on to an even more heavily guarded section, the air here buzzing with barely contained energy. You stand before a containment unit made of thick, lead-lined walls with numerous warning signs indicating extreme radiation and temporal instability. This is the containment for SCP-093, Red Sea Object. SCP-093 is a smooth circular disk, approximately 7.6 centimeters in diameter, composed of an unknown red mineral. Its primary anomalous property manifests when a living human looks directly at it. The individual's perception of their surroundings will subtly shift, and they will perceive a doorway or opening into an alternate dimension. The nature of this alternate dimension depends on the emotional state of the individual looking at SCP-093. Individuals experiencing feelings of sadness or loss will perceive a desolate, ruined cityscape. Those feeling anger or aggression might see a war-torn landscape. The specific details of these dimensions vary, but they are consistently hostile and often populated by dangerous entities. Once an individual has passed through the perceived doorway, they are transported to the alternate dimension corresponding to their emotional state. Communication with individuals inside these dimensions is difficult and often impossible. Attempts to retrieve them have met with varying degrees of success, often resulting in casualties among retrieval teams. SCP-093 itself cannot pass through solid matter. The doorway it creates is purely perceptual, affecting only the individual looking at it. However, objects carried by the individual entering the alternate dimension will also be transported. Allow your breath to become slow and deep. Feel the gentle rise and fall of your chest, like the slow rhythm of the tide. There is no need to hold on to any of the unsettling images or thoughts. Let them drift away like fallen leaves on the surface of the water. You are safe, you are calm, and you are surrounded by a sense of quiet serenity. The journey through the strange and unsettling world of the SCP Foundation is over for tonight. The mysteries will remain, the questions unanswered for another time. For now, allow yourself to sink deeper into this feeling of tranquility, this peaceful stillness. Let your mind become quiet and your body relax completely. Good night.